everyone. Thank you so much for being here. You've all supported me so much through this process. I really appreciate it. We're finally done. We're finally at the ending point. So without further ado, this is the importance of diversity in children's literature. So a little bit about me, which is funny since you all know me pretty well already. My major is early childhood education, and I have a STEM integration minor, and I'm currently a senior, class of 2024. I chose this project because I am biracial. My dad is Burmese and my mom is white. So I felt really underrepresented in children's literature growing up. I didn't see myself in the children's books that I was being read to at school or that was available in my library. I didn't even see myself in TV shows as a kid. And I would get so excited when I saw a mixed family on the TV. And I find that kind of sad that it was such a rare sighting that it brought me, I would light up and I'd be like, Mom, look, they look like you guys. And I don't think that it should have been as big of a deal as it was. I think it should have been more common. And I want to prevent that feeling for other children. So I wrote a book called Why Are We Different? And the first part of my thesis was coming up with that idea, brainstorming ideas about my book. I was very nervous about doing a thesis for the Honors College. I was doubtful. I wasn't really sure where I was going to go with it, what I was going to write. And then Dr. Thyram said, oh, well, you can do a creative project. And I love being creative. I love drawing. So naturally, I thought, why don't I write a children's book? That seems pretty easy. I was wrong. It was not easy, but it was a very fulfilling project. So I brainstormed ideas about my book. I wanted it to feature all different types of families. I wanted it to be for children who didn't have those traditional families, especially in the classroom. I feel like we don't see books that are read to children without traditional families, especially when I was growing up. I felt it was always mom and dad were the main characters. And I wanted a little biracial girl as the main character because obviously biracial is important to me, and I think that wasn't represented enough in children's literature. I think they did a really good job of representing races themselves, but I didn't see a lot of mixed children in books. And I had one idea when I started my book. I wanted to do a metaphor of diversity using flowers. My grandma raised me a lot when I was younger, and she loves nature, she loves flowers, she has the most beautiful garden to this day, and she taught me that love of nature. And I wanted to think about, well, what is a way that I could explain diversity to children that would really resonate with them? Something that wasn't too deep, but got them to understand why it was important that we were all different. So I had an idea of a child looking at a field of white, plain, yellow daisies. There wasn't any differences. It's kind of boring to look at. It's fun for the first minute, like, ooh, pretty flowers. But there's no differences. There's nothing to look at and observe. And then I had her imagine a beautiful garden full of different plants, flowers, vines. And I think you can agree that this is a lot more interesting to look at, all different colors, and I feel like that would resonate with children why uniqueness is so important, because people are kind of like flowers, where we need differences. Like, I see all your beautiful faces and none of you look exactly alike. For my researched existing diverse children's books, and I started with taking note of the publishing years, book formats, illustrations, types of families represented. Dr. Jackson helped me a lot with that process. I did that over the summer of my sophomore year. I checked out a bunch of books from my local library. There weren't as many as I would have liked, and I actually did a project for Dr. C about the different types of books that were in my library, and I was woefully disappointed that in 2023 there weren't that many. I think that also has a lot to do with the area that I live in. I grew up in a predominantly white community, and diversity was not always their priority, and I still don't think it is, unfortunately. So I made sure that I was looking at books that were recent and up to date. I paid attention to the book's formatting, where the text was, if the text went across the page all the way, if the illustrations would go from one side of the book all the way to the other. Maybe there were multiple small illustrations on the page. I took notes of what ideas I liked, and what I thought would flow best with my book. Then I researched scholarly articles about the importance of diversity and representation in children's literature. I wanted to gain a more deeper understanding of the topic and why it was actually important. I knew it was important because of my own personal experiences, but I needed to find that research to back it up. And once I did that, I had the draft laid out for my thesis paper, and I started writing out the text for my book. After I did that, I drew out outlines with stick figures, like Dr. Jackson suggested, just to see what I wanted my book to look like. I was able to make changes at that stage. And then I sketched out rough outlines, and I added more details to the illustration and started my character design. That was easily my favorite part of this. I got to pick what were the characters' favorite colors, what were their hair textures, what race would I choose. I got to choose the names for my characters. It was a really fun process, and I really loved the creativity from it. Once I did that, I inserted my text into the illustrations, and I finalized my book, and I actually have a printed copy here today. I'll be reading when I'm finished. It's not ready to be published. I wanted to get it published by Amazon, and it has to be more pages than I have, but I wanted a book that was more friendly for preschool and kindergarten age children, so I didn't think it needed to be as long, so that is still a work in progress. 3 articles that moved me, especially in my research, was how to talk to your toddlers about race. This article explained the significance of exposing young children to discussing race and differences that they are seeing so they don't become color silent. I think we're very naive that young children don't notice these differences and they aren't forming their opinions already. Children are learning just by interacting with their surroundings and what they're seeing, and they notice those changes. They notice how you are interacting with those different races, and they form their own opinions. So by introducing them to children's literature and the idea of diversity at a young age, you're helping them educate themselves and form those opinions so they understand and they aren't afraid to discuss it. I think a lot of the times children have been taught that race is something that shouldn't be talked about, that we shouldn't acknowledge it as much, and I think the opposite is the case. For what's trending in children's literature and why it matters, this article discussed the significance of children's literature to children's developing self-images. Personally, I saw that a lot as a kid, and I really enjoyed learning more how children need to see themselves and their cultures reflected so they feel that their culture is of value. I think that makes perfect sense. If a child is in a classroom and their teacher is constantly reading books that don't feature their race or their culture at all, they're thinking, oh, well, my culture just doesn't matter as much as the others, and that's okay, but it's not okay. And I think we need to address that, especially when picking children's literature for our own classrooms. And then the windows and mirrors of your child's bookshelf was probably my favorite one. I was really excited when I was shown this video by my professors, because Grace Lynn is actually one of my favorite authors as a kid. She's one of the only books I remember reading that had the Asian culture. I remember especially her book Dumpling Days was one of the first books I really resonated with. She was born in America and she was raised American, but she got to visit her family in China, and she felt like she wasn't Asian enough, and she felt like she didn't understand her culture. And I have felt that way at sometimes family reunions when you don't feel like you're enough of one race or you're not enough of another. Grace Lynn's character wasn't biracial, so she just felt like she wasn't Chinese enough, but I have felt both that I'm not Asian enough or white enough to go on either sides of my family. I think that's a very interesting feeling that I know I'm not the only one who feels that way. And I really appreciated learning about her experience of not realizing her culture was important as a child and how significant children's literature and children's media was to that. It was crazy to learn that when she was a child, she saw herself as a white girl in the mirror because that's all she knew. And she didn't learn about her Chinese culture until she was in college. So that was really disheartening to hear, but I love learning about how she made a change in children's literature for the better. So for Why Are We Different, the themes in the book are family, diversity, community, and inclusion. The book takes place in a city. At the end, you see an apartment building with a bunch of different families, and I wanted to show that in this community that I feel like in cities there are a lot more diversity than probably in some other areas, so I did want to stay realistic to what you would see in the book. And then types of families that were featured, I had same-sex parents, children being raised by a grandparent or maybe another guardian, parents with a disability, and parents of different races, and single parents. The lasting impacts, specifically on myself, this process was incredibly eye-opening for me. There's not as large of a gap in diversity in children's literature as I thought there was when I started, but I see that there's still a long way to go. So that was very mixed feelings for me to learn that. My hope is for this book that children get to see their families and have that moment where their eyes light up like mine did when I saw a mixed family in media or in books. I want to prevent that feeling of not being represented and not seeing yourself. And I also want children to realize that families come in all shapes and sizes and expand their worldviews. So even children who have those traditional families, it's important that they learn about that not every child is that way. And I think if we start it young, it won't be as surprising when maybe you make a friend, and it won't be a confusing experience when mom and dad live in separate houses. That won't be something that they've never heard of. For my teaching practices, this process was also really important and allowed me to reflect how impactful the decisions of what books I read in the classroom have on my students. I want to make sure that the books I choose reflect each of my students' cultures, at least at one point. I want to make sure that I have books available in the classroom and at my school's library, if I can make a difference, that reflect all the different students in the classroom, just to make sure that they understand that their culture is valued in this school and that my classroom is a safe place for them to embrace that difference. I want to create that classroom community. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and read my book. So it's story time. All right. So this is Why Are We Different by Noelle. To my family, thank you for teaching me compassion and how everyone is unique in their own way. It was family day in Evie's kindergarten class. I hope you all had fun learning about each other's families today. I would like you all to go home tonight and share what you learned with your family. See you tomorrow, Miss B said as the last bell rang. Hi, Mama, Evie said as she got off the bus. Welcome home, Evie, her mother replied. What did you learn at school today? We talked about different types of families, and I have a question, Evie said. And what is that, my darling? Her mother responded. Why are we different? What do you mean? Her mother asked. Well, my family is you, Daddy, Andrew, and me, but Sally's mom and dad live in different houses, and Antonio's grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins all live in the same house, and Evie's mother smiled and took her hands. Oh, Evie, that is the beautiful thing about families. They are all different. Imagine if there was a garden that only had the same type of flower. They all looked exactly the same. Well, that's not very interesting, Evie said. Exactly. Now imagine a garden that has many different types of flowers, all beautiful in their own way. There are so many different types of families. Why don't you tell me about some more of the families from your class today? Well, Tyler has 2 moms, but no dad. Natalia's dad is in a wheelchair, but her mom isn't. Priya's grandma takes care of her and her brother. She says that her mom and dad couldn't take care of them, so they live with their grandparents. Keon was adopted from South Korea. Both of his parents are white. He is still learning English, but Miss B says he's a quick learner. Wow, her mother said. It sounds like there are a lot of different types of families in your class. Just like flowers, families come in all shapes and sizes and have lots of variety. In fact, no 2 families are the same. But Evie, there is something that all these families have in common, her mother said. What's that, Mama? Evie said. These families love each other, they support one another, they have fun together. Mama, I have another question. And what might that be? Her mother answered. I get why we are all different, but what makes us all the same? We are all human. The end. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Pass it around. At this time, if you have any questions, feel free.